Yeah, I mean, even if you throw away the stats with Maikel Franco through these 18 or 20 games or whatever it's been, you look at the home runs that he's hit. I mean, you mentioned that they weren't cheapies. The one the other night tied the game in the eighth inning, had so much hang time. The one last night took that 98-mile-per-hour knee-high fastball from Aroldis Chapman and just crushed it out to left center field. 2 of his 4 homers this year have come against Aroldis Chapman and Steven Strasburg. Two of the most feared pitchers in the game in terms of fastball velocity and just overall stuff. So those are great signs to see for Maikel Franco, because it's been a long, long time since the Phillies had bona fide right-handed power. You can probably go all the way back to 2012 when they traded Hunter Pence midway through the season. That was the last time the Phillies had a legitimate, dangerous right-handed bat in the middle of the lineup. And, these 2 comebacks, they're fun, but they're even more fun when you consider that they have been keyed by the only guy in this lineup you can say is a potential centerpiece offensively for the future.
Yeah, and, I don't know where people's minds were going when he was kind of struggling there in that little 2-week so span where you're like, maybe he's just not ready, or, this is a little slump. But I think this is a good indication, Corey, and you and I talk a lot about young guys and are they ready. But I think this is a good indication that if you got to give guys a chance, not yo-yo them up and down or sit them. They just stuck with them even when he was, struggling a little bit. Didn't give him a day off here. They just let him go out there, kept him in the 5-hole. It wasn't like, all right, you're going to move to 7 because you're struggling. I like the way they've at least just let him go out there, play, and stay in the same spot. So I guess you got to give Sandberg and the Phillies a little bit of credit for the way they've handled him, even when he was struggling.
Absolutely. I mean, Ryan Howard, a couple weekends ago when the Phillies were in D.C., we asked him just for his overall thoughts on Maikel Franco, and he said that he thinks it's unfair to put any kinds of numbers or expectations upon Franco. You just got to let the kid go out there and play and do what he does, and everything else is going to come. And right now that's what the Phillies are doing. I think it's a great thing that the Phillies are playing him against every pitcher they face. They're not making him just a platoon guy against lefties. They're having him face the tough right-handers because he's going to need to do that down the road anyway. So, this really is a season all about gauging what they have in terms of youth, and the fact that Maikel Franco has looked like a difference maker offensively and defensively, even if the numbers don't jump out at you. The signs have been there, and the Phillies look like they have a good one on the left side of the infield. And when you throw J.P. Crawford, their top position player prospect, into that mix as well, it looks like they should be, pretty well set for years to come at shortstop and third base.
Yeah, and let's talk about him. He got promoted to Double-A, and obviously, that's a closer step to the big leagues, but he's still a little bit of ways off. Where is his progression? Why was he promoted, and what is the next step timeline-wise for JP?
Well, he was promoted because he had close to a 500 on-base percentage at High A, and that really is carried over into Double-A. I've said it before. I'll continue to say it. To me, the most impressive aspect of J.P. Crawford's game is his plate discipline. Okay, he's a 21-year-old kid who has walked as often as he struck out in his minor league career, which is pretty incredible. We're talking about over 200 games, and he has about 120 walks and 120 strikeouts in his minor league career, which is really saying something because he's not a big power guy. That really speaks to his ability to spit on outside pitches and really just his overall knowledge of the strike zone. When I look at timetables for Crawford, I could see him getting up to the Phillies next summer. I could see him getting up next September. I think he's more of a 2016 guy than 2015. I mean, I can't see him getting up this year unless he just absolutely goes on a blazing run at Double-A. But, I look at J.P. Crawford as really a 1 or 2 hole hitter for the Phillies for a decade. And after what the Phillies had from Jimmy Rollins for so long, it'll be nice to not have to wait too long for that next shortstop to come up, provided that he stays healthy. When you look at the infield, Phillies appear to be well set at third with Franco, shortstop with J.P. Crawford, and Freddie Galvis. You could do a lot worse than having him as your second baseman.
Yeah, that's be interesting. I was going to ask you that. What do the Phillies look at Freddie Galvis at long term? I mean, he's a guy who's very good defensively, held his own with the bat. He's slumping a little bit here, but is he just a stopgap, or do they look at him as an everyday player that they need to find another position for?
See, this is a kind of an internal dilemma that I bet the Phillies have thought a little bit about, and they're going to continue to think about as time moves forward here. But like Freddie Galvis, for example, last night made an incredible play on Billy Hamilton, the fastest runner in the majors, making a diving play and immediately getting up and being able to throw him out. There's maybe 4 or 5 shortstops in all of baseball who make that play. Defense is by far Freddie Galvis' best skill. So when J.P. Crawford does eventually come up, if Galvis is still in the mix here, it's tough. I mean, do you go with the best defense at that time, which would probably be Galvis at short, even though Crawford is seen as an above-average defender? or do you risk kind of stunting the growth of Crawford by playing him at second? I think the Phillies would opt for the more long-term approach and play Crawford at short and have Galvis at second because, Ryan Sandberg said earlier this season that Freddie Galvis is the Phillies' best defender at second, short, and even in a couple of the outfield spots. So his versatility will pay off in that regard. Now,
do you think then that Chase Utley's tenure here will they take that into account with Galvis? I mean, as long as Utley here kind of stunt Crawford, or will they not allow that to happen? Because that's something in the past where you look at, he's blocking here, so he's going to stick around. We saw that with Howard and Utley delay their, ability to get up here with Polanco and Tomei.
Well, it's an interesting idea because Utley does have a couple of these vesting option years remaining on the contract. Everybody reported the deal as a 2-year, $28 million deal. Well, in reality, it can reach as high as 5 years and $70 million, the extension that he signed a couple of years ago. But I don't think that Chase Utley is going to really hinder the growth of any of these guys, because if it does come to that, where Crawford is eventually up in 2016 or 2017 and Utley's still here and Galvis is in the mix as well, I think you might see Utley shift over to first base. I think that's probably where he's destined if he remains a Philly the next couple of years, and obviously that's also dependent on the ability to move Ryan Howard at some point, but I would imagine that opening day 2017, Ryan Howard's probably not going to be here.
Corey Seidman's with us, CSN Philly, looking at the Phillies here. Ryan Howard may not be here. Is it because there could be some interest in him? Is the way that he's been hitting the ball and producing runs going to make his name interesting on the trade market?
Well, last night we saw that the Mariners acquired Mark Trumbo, who's a guy who's a lot like Ryan Howard was a few years ago. Mark Trumbo is a guy who's going to have a low batting average, a lot of power, and a ton of strikeouts. The return for Mark Trumbo was not really that strong, the return the Diamondbacks got, and I can't imagine that there's so much interest in Ryan Howard even after that 30-game hot stretch he was on. He's really reverted back into the player he was in 2012, 13, and 14. And when you look at the overall numbers, at least as of the other day, Ryan Howard, last I checked, had 8 walks and 52 strikeouts. So even at teams like the Angels, the Rays, the Twins, maybe even the Cardinals with Matt Adams hurt, yes, they could use a first base boost, but unless Ryan Howard can show that he can be consistent, for more than a month at a time, I just can't see anybody really giving up a ton to get him. It's definitely better for the Phillies now than it was before the season, because before the season it looked like Ryan Howard was just like a pumpkin, like there was nothing left that was going to be coming out of that bat. So at least he's displayed a little bit of the home run power. But it's going to be very difficult to move him, and the Phillies are going to have to pick up probably 90% of that contract.
Corey, we've talked about Franco and obviously JP. The next guy is Nola. He's just dominating. Is there a timetable, maybe not for the majors, but does it make sense to put him up against AAA guys, and would that happen sooner than later? I mean, it just seems like he's toying with AA guys at this point.
Yeah, and I think he did it again today. I think he went 7 innings and allowed 1 run, and it's just like every time you look at it, Aaron Nola, his pitching line, it's like 7 innings, 4 or 5 hits, between 0 and 2 runs. I don't see what he has left to prove at AA. I really don't. I wouldn't be surprised if his next start came at AAA. The Phillies recently promoted Gabe Leno, the catcher, from AA to AAA, and I don't want to read too much into that, but I kind of wonder if maybe that was because they have plans of moving Nola up and they want to keep him with the catcher that he's worked with. But AAA would be the next step, so we can face some more experienced hitters, guys who have either been in the majors and are on the way down, or guys who are really progressing through the minors and are one level away. But I wouldn't be shy to see Aaron Nola's next start come at AAA and for him to make 4 or 5 starts there before joining the Phillies rotation. If you add him into this rotation right now, he'd be the 3rd best starter, but after Hamels and Harang.
Speaking of Hamels over at CSN Philly, you say there are a couple of teams that might be a nice fit, and we're going to obviously start hearing more. He pitched pretty well again last night. So where are some teams to keep an eye on with Hamels?
Everybody's mentioned the Red Sox for about 6 to 8 months now, and they're an obvious fit because they have a lot of money, a lot of prospects, and a big need for pitching. But to me, the best fit right now is the Texas Rangers. And the reason I say that is because while the Red Sox are fading, the Rangers are surging. They've gotten a rebound year out of Prince Fielder, and that offense is really clicking. They just have a huge, huge weakness in the starting rotation, with 80% of the rotation injured right now. But the reason I think they're the best fit for Cole Hamels, the Texas Rangers, is because they have exactly the prospects the Phillies need. The 2 guys that I mentioned in the article over at CSNPhilly.com today were catcher Jorge Alfaro, who's one of the top 5 catching prospects in the minors. He's a guy who has some defensive issues, but offensively he is a rare talent behind the plate. And they have right fielder Nomar Mazara, who is really progressing through the minor league charts in terms of prospect rankings. He's a guy with power, a left-handed hitting, 6'4", 20-year-old outfielder. I think if you build a trade around those two guys, the Phillies would be addressing their two biggest weaknesses organizationally, which is catching and outfielders with power. And that, to me, just looks like the ideal fit. Whether or not a trade gets done, I'm not sure. I do know that the Phillies talked with the Rangers earlier this year, and nothing really materialized there. But as July 31st approaches, these teams are going to need to make the move to separate themselves from the pack, because there are just so many teams that can still talk themselves into contention in both leagues.
Corey Seidman's with us, CSNPhilly.com, at Corey Seidman, CSN on Twitter to read more on that Cole Hamels deal. Let's look at the draft coming up. You know, in so many other years, kind of insignificant. Baseball draft doesn't get talked a lot. You know, it's not football or basketball where you know the players, but it's becoming more and more important. How important is this one for the Phillies, and do you anticipate them going what is their philosophy going to be? Do you anticipate them doing like they did last year and taking the guy who's most ready, closest to the majors, or do they go back and try to find a guy that they can have more time to develop? Because, as we've kind of said with Nola, they didn't need a guy that was this close, and now they have to kind of rush him because, he's already kind of ready. Do they find a guy who's maybe in high school? Is that the way they go? What is their thought process where they are with this particular draft?
Well, it's an extremely important draft because every time that you're drafting toward the top, you need to hit because, that's how, the Nationals got out of the basement, is getting really lucky in those two drafts with Harper and Strasburg. That's how the Astros, got themselves out of the abyss. But, at number 10, the guys that you've seen projected to go to the Phillies a couple times, I've seen Tyler Stevenson. He's a high school catcher out of Georgia. Obviously, catching is a big need, and Stevenson is seen as the best catcher in this draft. He's further away, being a high schooler. And there have also been some college pitchers that the Phillies have been linked to. It's just going to be best player available. The Phillies had Johnny Almaraz, the Phillies scouting director, said that last night that they have about 15 players on their board for that number 10 overall pick, and they're just going to take the best player available. That's the beauty of being in the Phillies position, is really you can't go wrong any position you draft unless it's like a shortstop, because you're pretty much thin at every position across the field. But Tyler Stevenson is definitely a name to keep in mind, and there are a couple college pitchers out there too, because even with the additions of guys like Aaron Nola and Ben Lively and Zach Eflin, the Phillies do not have that hard-throwing pitching prospect. I mean, Nola is a guy who sits in the low 90s, as is Eflin. Neither one projects as really an ace. They're more of like number 2, number 3 starters. So you might see them opt for some upside from a pitcher as well at that number 10 pick.
Hey, Utley the other night, 3 for 4, hit that home run, hit the ball hard, hit the ball the other way. Obviously up over 200. I mean, is this a sign that Utley is not at the end of the line?
I don't think he's at the end of the line at all. I mean, when he was hitting 099, I wrote an article and I wrote that for Utley to get to 270 on the year, which is what he hit last season, for him to get to 270 and 500 bats this season, all he needed to do from that point was hit 308 the rest of the year. And since then, he's hit 342. And he's hitting the ball hard. He's hitting it with authority. The other night was a great sign because he finally beat the shift on a bunt single. I mean, we've been calling for Ryan Howard to do that for years. So he beat the shift with a bunt single. He later homered off Johnny Cueto and added another single. Johnny Cueto's a great pitcher. So to see Utley do that, it just speaks to his ability to still hit good pitching. He's still, on a pitch-by-pitch basis, has the recognition of the strike zone, has the pop, and the ability to be a productive major league hitter. It's just he's in a bad spot where there's just so much pressure on him because there's such little offense around him. But I don't think by any stretch he's done, especially when you look at the weak landscape of second base across the league.
Yeah, he started that night at 194, went up over 200 by the end of the night, so you can still see the averages are taking a jump, and if Utley can stay hot, maybe he can get himself to a little bit more respectable number. We're talking with Corey Seidman, CSNPhilly.com. We know we're only in June here, but another name we talked about, Hamels. How about Papelbon? I know he's continuing to pitch really well. Are you getting to the point, Corey, where you would be surprised if he's here in August?
I would be very surprised if he's here in August, just because it seems like each year he's gotten better with the Phillies, and it's really peaked this season. I think the ERA is 1.29 or so, and he just his numbers, despite the diminished fastball velocity, every other number in his repertoire has gotten better. His walk rate is better as a Philly than it was as a Red Sox. His ERA is lower as a Philly than it was as a Red Sox. And there's so many teams across baseball that need help in the bullpen. I do think, though, that you might see like a Papelbon and Aaron Harang package or a Papelbon and Cole Hamels package, just because by himself it's really tough to gauge what Papelbon's true value is. teams don't like the salary that he's going to command. And teams don't want to give up top prospects for him. And that obviously is the Phillies' intent here, is to get a good prospect. It's not to free up some of that money with Jonathan Papelbon, because they can pay that money. It's just they need a difference-making return to make them actually deal away a guy who's been one of the top 10 relievers in baseball his entire time here.
Corey, obviously this team, there have been some exciting moments last night at the ballpark. One of the things, too, they had that 7-game losing streak. Then they win a couple of games. But they did it with the young guys, as you said. It's good to see. How about bringing Asche back, and how, he was on with us earlier in the week, and he said, quite frankly, he wasn't too happy about it, and he's learning. But are you seeing him become a contributor? Does he look like he's confident, and not confident, but comfortable out there? Are we starting to see him become a guy that, looks like he's going to be here for a couple of years? I mean, is he another young guy that you're keeping an eye on?
Cody Asche is a competent major league hitter. I don't think he's a centerpiece. He doesn't have the upside or the potential of a Maikel Franco. But he's 6 for 19 since he came back. I think one of the hits was a double, the other 5 were singles. In my opinion, Cody Asche long-term is a decent 6 or 7 hole hitter, and he can play from left field as long as the Phillies surround him with enough offense. But he can't be a guy that you're looking at as one of the 2 or 3 best offensive players in the lineup, because if that's the case, you're not going to be scoring too many runs. That's, not to really – I don't want to bash Cody Asche or anything, because I think he can be a decent contributor, a guy who hits like 275 with 14 homers, 70 RBIs, maybe a 340 on base percentage. But at some point, he's going to need to do that over a full season. And to date, we haven't seen that yet. And the left field defense has been, it's been decent. He really hasn't stood out in a positive or negative way since being recalled.
Yeah, the other night it was funny. He made that catch at the wall. He kind of just jumped up in the air. I guess he, having a little bit of trouble still reading the wall and all those kind of things. Obviously, I like what we see from Franco, and you mentioned Crawford and Nola. There's a lot of young players, but other than that group that we hear a lot about, is there another guy that fans could keep their eye on in the minors?
There are 2 guys the Phillies have, position player-wise. Aaron Altair, an outfielder who was up for, I think he had like 2 at-bats last season. I think he could be a decent 4th outfielder. When I look at him, I think of Justin Maxwell, a guy who's been around the league. I think he's with the Giants now, was with the Royals and the Astros before. He's a decent extra outfielder. I think that's what Aaron Altair can be. Big guy, athletics and speed, a little bit of pop. The other guy is Art Charles. I had a chance to talk to him a couple weeks ago over at Reading. He was the Phillies' return in the Maikel Schwimmer trade a couple years ago, and his power has really emerged. I mean, he is one of the top power hitters in the Eastern League, and the Phillies do have a need at first base moving forward, because Ryan Howard's not going to be here forever, and Art Charles could be, he could be the Phillies' first base in 3 or 4 years down the road if he continues to progress. But overall, it's not a very strong system. I mean, they're a bit top heavy with the guys like Nola and Crawford, but after that, it's a long cast between those couple guys and the next tier.
All right, Aaron Harang goes tonight for the Phillies, and he's a guy, obviously, you're going to hear his name coming up as well. I'm sure you'd be pretty stunned if he was here after the deadline. Yeah,
Aaron Harang. I mean, there isn't a team in baseball that isn't kicking themselves for not signing him to that 1-year, $5 million deal the Phillies got him for. Aaron Harang is tied for the Major League lead with 10 quality starts this year and 11 tries, and the only pitcher in baseball the last 2 seasons with more quality starts than Aaron Harang is Johnny Cueto. I mean, wow. Harang is tied with Felix Hernandez, for goodness sake. But yeah, Aaron Harang, I think that he will be moved just because he's a guy who is a 2-month rental. He'll be easy to trade. It's not a ton of money being involved, and the Phillies are just going to look to get something of substance in return. You look a couple years ago when the Phillies traded even Jim Thome, for example, when they traded Jim Thome to the Orioles when he was completely spent, they got back Gabe Leno, who's a decent catcher who I mentioned just moved up to AAA, and a reliever, Kyle Seidman, who was a former high-round draft pick. So even in that deal, the Phillies picked up some potential. That kind of set the baseline for what you would be hoping for in a Harang trade. You're not going to get a top prospect, but you should get something substantive, maybe a double-A pitcher, a double-A outfielder, something to help out. Yeah, and I guess you're going to see more teams try to come up with these kind of deals. I guess you can – I asked this question the other day, Corey, with all the stuff surrounding Ruben, his comments and the past and everything. And I guess if I ask this question, if Ruben just got hired this offseason to fix all this, and this is what he's done, and you took the past out, good or bad, and this was his first year offseason, is he doing a good job as a GM? Yes. I think that the decisions that the Phillies have made over the last 18 months have been pretty positive. The fact that they've held on to Cole Hamels, everybody loves to criticize him for the fact that Hamels hasn't been traded yet. Well, guess what? The Phillies need to absolutely win that trade in order for it to be made. If they take anything less than 100 cents on the dollar, that's a failure. You look at the other moves, trading Marlon Byrd, getting a young pitcher for him, getting 2 young pitchers for Jimmy Rollins, getting Joely Rodriguez, another young arm for Antonio Bastardo. The Phillies rid themselves of players they didn't need. They brought in some young talent. They've drafted well the last 2 years. And this year, they're doing what they need to do in terms of playing younger guys. So I can't think of too many criticisms with Ruben Amaro Jr. this year, aside from the comments he made a couple weeks ago, which were pretty regrettable. But, other than that, I think he's had a solid season. It's just going to be – there's just so much work to be done with this rebuilding process, and obviously he can't really get kick-started until the biggest fish, Cole Hamels, moves.
All right, he's Corey Seidman over at CSN Philly. Corey Seidman, CSN on Twitter for more on the Phillies in Major League Baseball. Great stuff as always, Corey. Always enjoy talking to you.
Thanks, Mike. You too.